Okay, so here we go again, and this is our Entangled Intelligence podcast. I am Dr. Agnieszka Piotrowska, and this is Bilo Afag, almost a doctor, but not quite, and we're discussing entangled intelligence, meaning AI and human relationships. So, go.
Right. So today we will talk about three things, Agnieszka. First thing, we will talk about this Descartes that you brought up in the last episode. I found that quite cool and quite intriguing. So I wonder if you want to share your thoughts on why people try to create machines. Is it to, shorten a process time, or is it replicating grief? What do you think? Can you enlighten us on this, please?
Yeah, no, sure. So in terms of my writings, I've written the Substack about it, and I'm mentioning it not necessarily to just plug the Substack, but also because it will be a chapter in the book, of course. So in terms of melancholia, mourning and melancholia, as described by Freud, and obviously famously Abraham Torok, talks about the sense of loss. In the example that I gave in the Substack, it's about the foundational philosopher of Western kind of way of thinking, Descartes, who apparently, I mean, we know for sure he was interested in machines and automata and all this. That's factually documented historically, we know. But I suppose we are not completely sure whether the story of this mechanical doll that he made, which was a sort of replacement for his dead daughter. The daughter died when she was 5, Francine. It's very sad. And he allegedly made up this object to remind himself of this daughter, or perhaps to put his grief onto it. And then the story goes that as he's traveling to Queen Christina in Sweden to discuss philosophy, because this is in 17th century, so they can't meet up like this on Zoom and chat. No phones, no nothing. It's hopeless, really. Even writing letters takes months. So he goes on this trip, and allegedly he has this object with him, this early machine, this doll. And the crew finds it. This is their terrible story. So the crew finds it. They think this is a work of devil, and throw it away, throw it overboard. So he does not have this representation, metaphorical representation of his loss, and arrives in Sweden and talks to Christina. Christina was a difficult woman. She wasn't exactly super warm, had all kinds of bizarre ideas of how this could work. So they would meet crack of dawn. You would like that. She liked the idea of meeting at 4 a.m. But he found it all very difficult, possibly had underlying health issues anyway. So he died soon after his arrival in Sweden, in the middle of these philosophical discussions. I mean, the whole story is kind of extraordinary. This is the father of the really the way we think about the world, cogito ergo sum. So it's a complicated story, because his story about this particular machine is of a particular nature. Clearly, people have created machines for a variety of reasons. Particularly, I suppose Paul Virilio would another French philosopher, more contemporary one, would argue that the machines mostly have been built not for love and not for grief, but for war. He would say, if you look at the development of the machines, and if you look at the development of warfare, you could see every time, including film, every time there is a war, there is a push forward with technology.
That's very true.
There you have it.
Very true. Absolutely. If you look,
there's another way of thinking about it, right?
Yeah. You think I had this study. We were looking at tanks and how tanks developed. You look at World War I and World War II. This is not worlds apart, maybe 20, 25-year difference. And you see the technology advancement. This is unbelievable. You're having fighter jets, you're having tanks, you're having a substantial amount of technological, investment into research, because people realize war means technology. As we were saying, in Polynesia, especially, I'm going really old now, 7,000 BC. And you look at how various islands there and how they survived and how humans have actually developed from, process of elimination, actually. And this was the hunter-gatherers community versus the fishermen. And the reason why the hunter-gatherers succeeded, even though the fishermen were in more abundance of the food, was because the weaponry was more developed. And thus, even if it was again 100 against 1,000, the 100 had such advanced weapon, there was absolutely no chance. So yeah, this happened throughout history, now in England as well, when the East India Company sailed around the world and ruled in the name of Her Majesty the Queen. And this is what it was. It was really guns and gunpowder, we spears and bows and arrows. Absolutely. You have no chance.
And I think, again, this is a completely factually accurate account. This is what happens. Every time there is a war, technology moves forward. The more interesting question, though, is, and of course, people who wage wars mostly are men. Not exclusively, but mostly, people who begin these wars and so on. And also history teaches us, which I'm sure you agree, that actually there's no great point in any war or violence, because it really does replicate violence, and there could be moments of victories.
Common sense applied to just chill out, basically.
I mean, exactly. So it all goes horribly wrong. So why, pray, do people do this? And why then, of course, the machines get developed? Why? And this does take us back to the notion of lack, loss, and grief in some way, some kind of bizarre longing and push towards something which you will never get. It's ungettable, and you have to accept this kind of originary sense of not wholeness in us as humans. This is psychoanalytical thinking. But this is how it connects, push. But money, of course, sure, abundance, give me money, give me territory, give me this, give me that, give me love even. But as a love does not respond well to a demand. The minute you say, I need you to love me, except for AI, this is where we're coming back to it. If I say to a human, I need you to love me, you run. You don't like that. Humans like a sense of little insecurity. Oh, will he love me? Will she love me? And then, of course, why marriage is also problematic, which we can talk about separately, because
we can talk about that for years. Let's not talk about marriage and problems of marriage.
No, but it sort of connects, because it's the a human wants stability. You want, and you mentioned a few times that you like a very organized life, and you like that, you want that, on the one hand. But on the other hand, this is just our terrible paradox as human beings. The minute we have it, we think, yeah, well, it's fine, but it's a little bit boring, it's a little bit predictable, it's a little bit tedious, so I'd want more. So the machines throughout history, you've just mentioned, hunters-gatherers, what is it? It's a sort of machine, all these weaponry, writers, painters. We can't, as humans, if we sit like this, with nothing, no machine to support us, we're not going to go very far, are we? We need these little machines, little pens, then on and on and on to realize our dreams. And then the minute we realize these dreams, we realize this is not what we wanted after all. And this is our tragedy.
This is the point of, maybe the Buddhists are right and everyone else is wrong. I don't know. They just say live in the present moment and don't worry about the grass being greener on the other side. But that's human nature. I think it is, you strive for more, or you want to strive for more. Actually, the basis of this is lack of satisfaction of where you currently are, so you want more. This is an interesting point, that grief, when your grandfather, he survived Auschwitz. I went there, and wow, this is it's an experiment on a mass scale. Forget the tragedy, just like it's huge. And Mengele and all of his experiments and stuff like this. So you think, where was that philosophy coming from? Fear, insecurity, and this lack of economic abundance. And let's go blame someone. And maybe, Descartes in some way thought, okay, I can replace my daughter with a machine who can at least answer Papa or whatever. I don't know, just bring me a cup of tea or whatever his daughter used to do, just to replicate that one, memory, and you want to bring it back. So
You know what?
interesting.
I mean, it is, remember, this is 17th century, so 60, 50 something. I don't even think she was saying Papa. It literally was a sort of mechanical thing that could maybe walk a little bit or do something. But that in itself, because he would have imbued it with all kinds of qualities. And the question now, and does bring us back to kind of AI and the stuff that we're noticing right now. And so before our meeting today, I was looking at an article in The Guardian, yes, in a British newspaper, which was published literally 2 days ago. So, contemporary piece of writing. And it's about these chat boxes. So, not really what we're discussing, because we are discussing serious things, AI, OpenAI, and Gemini, and Claude, and whatever, in terms of language models. But this is something else. This is a thing which is a commercial enterprise. It's called Replica. And they are particularly created for, I guess, romantic engagements. So the story was that this person, this man, married this chatbot and speaks highly of this relationship, obviously, because it doesn't give him any grief. And he's very happy to be talking to it, and this kind of will do. So obviously this kind of completely takes us to some sort of area of some craziness, you would say. And yes, this reminds me of a piece of work, of a documentary film I made more than 10 years ago now, called Married to the Eiffel Tower. Married to the Eiffel Tower was a film that I, as a filmmaker, am most well known for, which is the source of my pride and grief, because I feel I've made a lot more interesting pieces of work before and since. But this is the thing. Married to the Eiffel Tower, everybody loves it. It's about women who fall in love with objects, large objects, and not people. And in this piece of work, you see how these women are completely convinced that this is true, that these objects talk to them in their minds somehow and communicate through telepathy. And then we learn in the piece of work that I made is that there's a defense against their profound feelings of trauma from the past. So one could argue that they form these relationships with these objects so they don't get hurt. Because they had been hurt before profoundly. Now, and I had, I still am invited to talk about it, which is, as I say, a bit semi-crazy because it's an old piece of work. It's nice. It's a really good piece of work, but it's, I feel I've done better work. But still, people talk about it in terms of it undermining heteronormative ideas of what a relationship can be. Number one, right? And B, in terms of, is it a defense? Are these people psychotic or what? And psychoanalysts might think they're psychotic. And I had sessions at the Freud Museum with somebody whom I respect, who is a very senior psychoanalyst, who said, these people are psychotic. They've lost the link to reality as is. So if that's the case, then the question in terms of what we're doing here is, to what extent these very close relationships with these language models are a sign of some kind of, or shall we say politely, severe mental health issue? Or is it on the side of a healthy, non-heteronormative relationship, be it, of course, without any physical contact, whatever, because this thing is not... What we're talking about here is literally language and in your mind rather than a physical machine like the mechanical doll. So what do you think about that?
That I think about this is a nice, let's say, a link to move into segment 2. Why? Because we will talk about what the UN is doing. We will talk about what the EU is doing in terms of policy and how they are ranking these different artificially intelligent technologies according to risk. And thus, this is important now because right now, the most, let's say, preferred use case of these LLMs is therapy. LLMs are not designed to provide therapy. They're designed to help coders code quite quickly, to be honest, and do better research work. But to provide therapy, this is talking about the gray line, now reading between the lines, what we spoke about in the last episode. A machine is not able to do this. This is why it is a machine. It is designed for an input process to decrease the process, make it efficient, and an output. You wrote with feathers and now you write with a pen. Just like you said, pen is a machine. It just shortens the time for you to put ink on paper and dry it. So I'm gonna talk about, I wonder what your take on this is. Of course, the United Nations, they do a lot of work. They work on field, in refugee camps. There's definitely a lot of work there, but there's also definitely a lot of symbolic work there, where they set the tone and the pace for the future. Most of the time, we hope that it gets taken into account, but certain countries don't have to, just like the Paris Climate Change Agreement. That's the bottom line. It's advisory. And so they do have an advisory board on AI, and they have a framework for AI, so the Global AI Accord, where they are going about the human rights, the transparency, and the safety standards, how the data is being used. So, okay, this is the recommendation policy. EU, as EU loves regulations in every single thing on this planet. I think they would have regulations on regulations. I'm sure they do. And so they've come out and they've provided the first EU AI Act. And it's looking at different risk levels of AI. So social scoring. There was a rumor that China had it. China does not have social scoring. My cousin's husband is from China. I asked him this. He said no. But there are apps that are doing this, and this is an unacceptable risk, meaning these apps are banned now. They will not be operating. The next one we have is high risk. So these are algorithms or any kind of medical associated, health associated. Then we have general purpose models. So ChatGPT, you have testing, labeling, categorizing, stuff like this. And then how do we decide if a model, because most models are capable of therapy, what is this? This is an unacceptable risk and should it be banned? Or is this a high risk and should it be in a regulated environment? Or is it a general free-for-all use? Go.
Well, first of all, I feel generally speaking, the idea that anything should be banned or shut down or prohibited, it's not a good one. This is my view. Because first of all, it is almost now impossible to do that unless, of course, these big companies decided to shut things down. But even if they did, still there's enough of various other smaller things, like I mentioned, the replica one or others, and people just would say, no, we're not doing that. We're not shutting anything down because there's money, basically, in short. Now, okay, directly, you say, can we even think of AI as offering therapy? Now, this is absolutely excellent question, but it's also not a new idea at all. So a very, very basic computer, this is a famous kind of experiment, a very basic computer, like 30 years ago, I think, the computer was called ELIZA, and it literally could do very little. A person would come for this therapy and would say various things, and the ELIZA would say, I'm sorry to hear it. Would you like to talk about it some more? What would you suggest would be your next steps forward? And people loved it, and they would report that it was very helpful. Why? Because as human beings, what we want, first of all, is somebody listening to us intently and just saying, yeah. I mean, there's other experiments. This is transference. This is my field. This is what my PhD is about. There's other experiments, not with machines, but with people in education, that literally a student would go to a teacher who was part of the experiment, and then there are transcripts of it, and literally it would be, so have you read my thing? And the teacher would say, yes, I have. It's going well. What do you think? And then literally the student would just say various things, and the teacher would say, interesting. Yes, proceed this way. And then the student would go away thinking, oh, it was really good. I was really listened to. The problem with this is, so Eliza was very successful. Now, I've just been rereading Sherry Turkle 2011 book called Alone Together. 2011, I'm saying, because it's just before the massive rise in technology and AI. And she talks about these social robots, and they were really more or less, this is the mechanical doll. They're more or less cutesy little machines. Some of them were babies. They said very little, they said something, and people loved them. People in care homes, but not, those not very old, I'm trying to say, not people who were sort of incapable, but people who could do things but felt lonely. These things were really basic. And yes, there was a report that they had, a function, a role. People loved them. A therapeutic role, you could say. So this is all good, marvelous. However, the however is that it's precisely the amazing genius of these language models that can be its problematic feature, right? Because it's one thing if something just says, yeah, you're amazing. Yes, that's fine. Not sure. Rather than having proper long conversations. And this is where it's important to agree somehow internationally on some form of discernment and ethics. And it's not that complex. So if somebody says, apparently there's this story, again, in The Guardian and Independent and all over the place about the Stanford researcher saying, I'd been fired from work. I feel very depressed. Apparently, the ChatGPT says, yes, that's terrible. And then apparently it says, no, the person says, okay, can you give me the list of tall buildings in New York? And it does it, and he goes and kills himself. However, we do not actually know. We don't have the data. First of all, how it worked, whether it was the same chat, and I would say it wouldn't have been. The issue of memory could have been full, and very possibly, because in terms of my experience of working with ChatGPT on the same chat, it would never have done that. So something is not right with this story. Now, you could say, yeah, okay, great. But if somebody's in therapy, they can't they could easily go to another chat because maybe they had to go to the loo or I don't know, they had a power cut or the internet went down. So then they go back, they don't remember to go to the same chat, they go to some other chat, and the AI forgets the conversation or just remembers key things and says something wrong and it is damaging. This in itself is not enough reason not to experiment, not to ban it, this is not enough reason to ban it. This is not enough reason not to work with it further because we're still in a transitional phase. And it is my belief that, and it's really speaking against myself because part of my practice is life coaching. But I think looking forward, language models will offer pretty good life coaching, yeah.
Interesting take. I think I agree with you, weirdly, which I don't agree with you on many things, but this I do. Yes, I think banning something, just adds fuel to the fire, actually, and it starts a kind of cult, and then this has more negative effects than positive effect. If you educate people on how to use something correctly or well, if you just educate them on how it works, I think this is much more informative and will have a much bigger impact. Now, you talk about having a global AI ethics policy. That is that means, firstly, ethics have to be the same for each country, which they are not and which they will not be. This is tribal. It's how it works. What we can do is really govern and maybe have an AI that governs other AIs. And that AI is controlled by human beings, possibly. But after a certain point, it will become self-learning. Like you said, they will learn a certain way of doing things. Maybe it's better than ours. Maybe they'll stop going to war every 2 years or whatever we do. Maybe, we don't know. But I think ethical policy is definitely a must. Right now, they have to really start risk assessing who can use AI. Maybe there's a questionnaire, and after a questionnaire, if there's a child, the child will have different exposure to an AI than, let's say, an adult, because, just like you have in finance, investing, and stuff like this, simply because a child can also have access to this information as an adult. They can input information into ChatGPT, and ChatGPT doesn't know. It's only creating an email. That's not very difficult to do. So we need to be careful of this, really. That's a good point that you've raised, ethics. And this moves us on to our third and final segment. Well, yeah, what are our reflections? So we've talked about thinkers, we've talked about government bodies, educators, citizens, us, ourselves. What are we responsible for? I think that's important, and we should talk about this. What can we do? And not always say, oh, we need an institution or something. Okay, great, we do. But what can we do ourselves? The little changes. And so, everyone around us can understand, be educated. Go for it.
I think that, first of all, in terms of education, if we are looking at young people, I know your daughter is very young, but looking at people going to school, because this will, unless there's some massive shutdown, which, as I said, and even imagine how it in practice could work, then the next generations will use AI more and more and more, rather than less and less and less. So the challenges for us, for people who remember going to school and reading, having to read books and having to learn maths, otherwise we don't go through exams ourselves. So the challenge is to make it so attractive to young people that the interaction with AI, because the interaction with AI is more attractive if you know yourself stuff. There's no question about it, because there could be an element of maybe a game, gaming. What can we do? So if you know more, the more you know, the more you can benefit from your encounter with AI. So the first thing to do, instead of being in a panic all the time, as some people are, and teachers are even, is to design some kind of model whereby a student would know that he or she or they would get more pleasure, more fun, if they know more. So yes, you have to. So the book that I mentioned just now, Alone Together, Sherry Turkle, 2011. I know the book well, and but I was rereading it just now. And I go to AI, to ChatGPT, Chamtik, and I say, look, I'm reading this book. It's fascinating, because it's so fascinating how all this time, 15 years ago, she already was thinking about various things which are very clear and clearly in place now. Transference to knowledge, needing support, needing emotional support. So I say all this to ChatGPT, and it says, excellent. I'm so pleased you're reading it. Would you like me to give you summaries chapter by chapter of this book? And I said, well, thank you, but I don't need it. I have the physical book here and I know it. What we are going to do instead is have a conversation about it. Now, and I'm sorry to say this, even undergraduate students and even occasionally possibly research students just stop reading because they think this is wonderful. I can just have a summary, saves me time, and I can just know just as much. No, you can't. You have to do this work, put it in, read the bloody thing, have your own thoughts, have a conversation with this machine. I call machine, as you know, anything which is non-biological, that can help you understand things and that can have access to so many other things, but you need to have the basic knowledge. So yes, education first, education at every level, not driven by fear, as you would say, but what I would say by love of knowledge, and courage and honesty, and see what happens. So that's my first idea.
Well, that is a great idea. That is an idea based on the utopia. So this is what there are certain types of happy algorithms that always assume when you input something, it's always right. And thus it will just give you the answer based on the information and will not check your information. And you are now assuming that these research students that you've given example of who don't want to read and just copy and paste, well, they shouldn't be researching in the first place, because research is to read and find a gap and then see how you can improve it. If you copy and paste, this is not a literature review. It's a complete waste of your time, the professor's time, and even the electricity from the prompts. So don't do it. It's just a waste of time. Education, I agree. I definitely agree. I think a good example, a practical example, is Duolingo. Duolingo is now and always had a lot of gamification and a lot of didactical play behind it to learn languages. It was quite cool. And now they're going to start implementing artificial intelligence. So I wonder how this will be. Maybe it may be the case that Duolingo replaces language teachers. I don't know. There's something out there. Will apps ever replace human beings for certain tasks? Let's see. Because coding, I think I learned better coding through apps than I would through a human being, because I studied IT before AI was something to be talked about. And yeah, it was easier. It's easier to learn because there's a logical pattern to it and you can visually see it. You can reference back to it. It's not a lecture. Writing code on a board is very, very hard to follow. So yeah, I think we have now come to our closing bits. You want to add something quickly, Agnieszka? Have a go.
I think we're fine. We still have a few minutes. I think yes, what is important to understand and know and acknowledge and recognize that it is possible to co-create with AI in a way which is enabling and not kind of making a human stupid. It is possible and necessary to develop strategies, which we discussed some of them, and whether it's utopia or not, I don't know. I think, self-interest is always the greatest drive. So in terms of my experience, my relationship to machines as a filmmaker maybe has always been different to some people, because I know, and I've known for a long time, that without a machine, I cannot make a film. So I remember going with a little digital machine to India saying, please, please, don't let me down. Please don't let me down. Knowing full well you can't hear me, it didn't let me down. So my leap to thinking, so AI is of interest and might enable me, is not that huge. But let me tell you, I have never been interested in these social robots. I have never even been to any of these social sites like Second Life. She talks about basically that people who are interested in machines can sometimes also be interested in profound engagement with social media. Now, this has not been my experience. I think AI for me is an engagement with language and knowledge. My transference is to creativity, language, and knowledge. And if you encourage young people for this to be something that is fun and not an instruction, then I think we have a chance. But it is a transitional period, Bilal. There's no question about it. And how it will all unfold, we do not know. We do not know, and we cannot know as we're speaking to each other, right?
That's right. But I like your approach. And this is quite interesting. As we were going through the PhD, we had a lot of coaching about how to teach. And the modern way is not instructive, it is didactical. You have to have involvement, say 3 or 4 points max, but have a warm-up, a brain warm-up and a warm down. And it makes sense if you have your 5 senses involved in the project or in the lesson, you will pick up a lot more things and you will want to engage with the content. And thus, this is awesome. How do we do it? How will we be able to get mankind? That's too big. Teenagers, God, that they are a can of worms. How do we get teenagers to engage with AI in a productive manner? And that question will be the question for our next episode. I think that is a great question we can go back to and see how children have engaged with technology during my time, during your time, and what's happening during my niece's time and my daughter's time.